But you mentioned myth. One of the myths that people have. One big myth is that money will find a way. Money will create success. Like if you had the right funder, if you had the right backing, some of the best financed companies go out of business. Money does not make the difference. I think, I think the game of entrepreneurship is hard. It takes some keen business acumen. It takes perseverance. It takes overcoming failure. Everybody will fail. You're not going to just knock it out the park the first time and just everything's a yellow brick road. It's one of the hardest, toughest roads ever. So I think that grit, that perseverance, that unyielding belief is what makes the difference, is what kind of separates the wishers from the doers.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Lanes of Mastery. Here today, we're here today actually with a special guest because everybody's special in their own way, but this guest is special because he talks about something that's actually different than what my family does, but is the same in the sense of my family that I grew up with. My mom's side of the family in particular are all entrepreneurs. Whether it's whether it's real estate, residential, commercial, whether it's owning laundromats and pizza stores and all kind of things where they, as I read in Miky's article, they did a lot of bootstrapping, right? And stuff like that. And so, this gentleman I'm super happy to get with because I think in our particular demographic and communities, we don't really know much about these concepts. And so we're getting our money from grandma and meemaw and grandpa and under the mattress and between the mattress and the backyard, right? So, it's really special to have someone who's in that space, who understands it, and that we can get an insight into what it is truly, not just the rumors, but also, how to do it. So, without any further, ado, I want to introduce Mr. MIKY BLAK. And I'll let him, kind of introduce himself as well and kind of, just tell us a little bit about himself.
Awesome. Thank you, Lucky. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the introduction. Really glad to have the chance to share a little bit about my background and what I'm doing now. Specifically because, as you mentioned, communities of color don't always have access to information and just the inner workings of some of the entrepreneurial business models that are out there. So a little bit about myself. Right now, I am working on the Republic. So the Republic is a venture capital group. We've got a small portfolio of brands, about 7 brands that we are working on right now in the online and finance space, but also working on an accelerator. So a little bit about my background and what has brought me to this point. Started off in finance. I had an uncle who was a stockbroker, was at Merrill Lynch, and so I would see him reading the stock sheets of the big, ledger newspaper and all this stuff, and was super fascinated by the global impact of the financial markets. I would see, things. I was fortunate enough to grow up in New York, and so you see the financial markets there, but also you learn about the interconnectedness of what our markets do here and the U.S.'s impact worldwide. So was fascinated by everything that I saw him involved with. And then later on, went to school for finance myself, went to State University of New York as a SUNY guy.
Okay.
SUNY Brockport, upstate. Went and studied economics. And after school, went straight down to Wall Street. Interned at Smith Barney, which is no longer around. I think they didn't. I think 100-year firm, but didn't make one of the crashes in the early 2000s. So, but I was intern at Smith Barney. Went on to work at American Investment Services and Paragon Capital, and make a career for myself as a broker, and did some underwriting, which is underwriting is when you help smaller companies raise capital, so to speak. So figuring out what their business is worth and how to approach capital markets and go through the whole process of raising funds. Did that in my early 20s. But being a young guy, I didn't want to be straight in finance all my life. So I went and made movies actually for a while.
Wow.
Went
Okay.
into film. Film led into an opportunity. I worked with a couple of familiar names. I worked with Spike Lee on the technology side. I did a couple of technology projects with Spike Lee. First, 40acres.com. I built. Also had the opportunity to work with Russell Simmons on One World Music Beat. He had a television show and magazine. So got
Oh,
very involved in media.
okay.
Just because it was cool, like it was much cooler than being a stockbroker, and so I wanted
Okay. Yeah.
to do something that the cool kids were doing.
Yeah.
And so from there, kept on the media side and kind of wove my finance and operations background into media, and have spent the last about 15 or so years working in a mix of media operations, specifically for a large scale brand client. So like a Johnson and Johnson's of the world, Pepsi International, working with large scale clients to execute a lot of media campaigns globally. So taking that same global business perspective,
Okay.
that media background, and
Okay.
working with large brands to execute more or less, I say social initiative campaigns. So with
Okay.
Johnson's Baby, just like children's health initiatives, and over the last 10 years, I've worked squarely with healthcare brands on healthcare initiatives and really getting medical and health information out there globally, which has been a great career. It's been a great time in terms of having access to just the corporate model and infrastructure of a lot of large players. But in the last couple of years, I've been leading men's professional groups, specifically men of color organizations, to help with access and opportunity in the space for men of color worldwide. Because I know, even though it might be hard for people of color here in the US, when you hear the stories abroad, whether it be the UK, South America, I think you end up hearing a lot of stories of struggle for people of color globally. And so that was the impetus to start the Republic, which is my current project. It's a portfolio of brands specifically um, to help with access to capital for minority and disadvantaged founders, but also to provide resources in terms of business literacy, financial literacy, but also community resources, having access to other professionals in the field that might be able to be of counsel, support, motivation, so on and so forth. So that's the current project this year. We're sort of like, I guess you would say, polishing the diamond on our current set of um, portfolio brands, and then just working in terms of, I think the big push now is just producing content. Like you were talking about the articles. So we publish a lot of articles that give fundamental business knowledge and information when you're talking about the concept of bootstrapping versus raising capital, and even how to think about the structure of bootstrapping a business and the different levels of work and infrastructure that requires. So this year, just putting out a lot of information, mentoring a lot of founders, and really sort of building that initial construct for the venture capital group.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's okay, man. That's great. That's a lot of information.
Yeah, so
It's
I
a
felt
lot of
like I was
information.
rattling on.
Yeah, no, it's good because it gives me a lot of other things I want to follow up with you on. One of which is what has been or what is currently rewarding about what you do.
A couple of things. So, a couple of things that have been surprising. So,
Okay.
I come from a disadvantaged background myself. Okay, single parent household. There were me and a sister, and mom struggled with health issues. Financially struggled. There were periods of homelessness, the whole thing that you could imagine. And once you get over that, once you achieve a certain level of success, you tend to leave that behind. You turn off that story.
Yes.
You turn on another story. Successful guy, and you just live this life.
Yes,
And
sir.
so, in this recent chapter of mentoring founders, the one fulfilling part has been being able to identify potential founders and young professionals that have a similar or in a similar situation and don't see a path forward, but being able to say with authenticity and experience that no, you can raise up out of certain circumstance. Like mentoring one guy, and he was had an issue with parents, found himself out of doors, and thought that that had to be an end. And I was able to say that that doesn't have to be the last chapter of your story. So being able to, for lack of a better term, offer a hand up. That's the most rewarding part, just to especially finding relevance in your story that you wouldn't have thought was meaningful. Like I wouldn't have thought my own personal struggle to be meaningful. I would have previously thought my personal struggle was something to be hidden or something to be left behind.
Mm-hmm.
But rediscovering purpose in that context has been rewarding.
What is something that has really surprised you? Maybe you just mentioned it, but when you like you said when you jump tracks a little bit to get into this, the more the media aspect of it, and now you're helping people. What is something that is really just something that's happened or something that is a part of your journey that you just could not have imagined before you started?
Um, One thing that's surprising, one's like people, people
Okay.
are always surprising. But having so there's one founder I was working with, and never underestimate people and what people can do when given access. So there's one founder, he was working on a project and it wasn't working out. And so I was just frank and I just told him exactly why it's not working. And I just did it as in a matter of fact way. And I didn't even expect anything to come of it because it was a lot of information. He had a lot of challenges. And
Okay.
so he just processed everything I said. And usually the amount of work he had in front of him would have been like a year's worth of work. But he went away. And within 2 months had radically executed on all these things that I thought was possible. And I just gave him the information. I didn't expect him to really achieve it. I just said, this is what you have to do. And to see that sort of radical execution, that radical growth, has been the most surprising. Specifically, sometimes everybody's human, right? Sometimes you underestimate people, and you think, oh, that's
No
impossible.
way.
Like,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
but to
yeah.
see people when that hunger is there, when that drive is there, be able to execute in circumstances that you would perceive to be challenging. But all they need is the information, all they need is the opportunity, and they can move mountains. So seeing people just move mountains never ceases to surprise me. That's the biggest surprise.
Ah, okay. And I think you might have alluded to it, hit a little bit on it. What what do you think? What do you think um, what do you think people's biggest obstacle is when they think about being an entrepreneur? What do you think their biggest obstacle? Maybe it's a myth. Maybe they believe something that isn't true, or maybe they just don't know what is or isn't true. What have you found? I'm sure there's probably more than one, but however you want to answer the question, what do you feel is like people's biggest initial entry to barrier entry, into this?
So there's a couple of things, and I'll unpack a little bit because there's a couple of um, items there. So the
Okay.
biggest barrier to entry is belief, and
Okay.
so I'll say usually people are their own fortune teller. And you can hear it in their language, right? Like that guy that I was talking about, I said, "Oh, you got all these challenges," and I've seen it time and time again. No matter what the challenge, if the entrepreneur says, "Oh, I got that," they usually 9 times out of 10 got that.
Okay.
But I've seen on the flip side, people with the financial resources, the education, the connections, if they see a problem as a insurmountable challenge, no matter how well equipped, if it's in your mind as insurmountable, it's going to be insurmountable. Like
Okay.
the belief, they say the miracle is in your mouth. They say
Mhm.
what you believe manifests, and so I think that's the biggest barrier. Is a lot of times you could be the best baker, but if you don't believe you can own a bakery, you won't own a bakery.
Yes,
If
sir.
you know if you're not a great baker, but you believe that you can have a great bakery, you will have it. Like one interesting fact, Charles Schwab.
Yes.
Charles Schwab is learning disabled. He's dyslexic,
Yes. I was reading some of his story years ago
and
about,
so,
yes. Okay. But not
and
all
so,
of it. Okay. Okay.
so he believed that running a financial services company was what he was going to do, and so he just surrounded himself with the people. He always found a way, despite what anybody would think would be insurmountable, to think that
Yes.
he could be learning disabled and say, "Oh, I'm going to be a financial services
Giant.
giant." You
Yes.
would get laughed at. But if
Yes,
you
sir.
believe it inside, you will always end up manifesting what you believe in. So I think that's the first challenge, is that just a belief in self, that self-determining belief. Um, but you mentioned myth. One of the myths that people have. One big myth is that money will find a way. Like money will create success. Like if you had the right funder, if you had the right backing, some of the best financed companies go out of business. Money does not make the difference. I think the game of entrepreneurship is hard. It takes some keen business acumen. It takes perseverance. It takes overcoming failure. Everybody will fail. You're not going to just knock it out the park the first time and just everything's a yellow brick road. It's one of the hardest, toughest roads ever. So I think that grit, that perseverance, that unyielding belief is what makes the difference, is what kind of separates the wishers from the doers.
Okay. Well, that leads me to kind of another question. What what is the makeup, if there is one? What is the makeup of an entrepreneur? What like when somebody comes to you and they're saying something to you, can you tell, or how long does it take for you to tell if they got it or not? Not necessarily their product or their service, but just them as a person.
Yeah. A couple of things.
Okay.
Um, Whether they're in it for the money or the mission.
Okay.
Um, People driven by money have like timelines, like, oh, I want to do XYZ in 6 months, or oh, I want to get to XYZ in a year. Um, I think some of the more successful entrepreneurs that I've known have these big, broad missions that can't be stopped, can't be measured by a year or a money amount. So I think that's one of the distinguishing factors is what you're in it for. Is it for service of others or service of yourself? Are you trying to create a piggy bank? Or are you trying to create something that really adds value to the ecosystem? So I think that's one of the distinguishing factors between those who realize larger success. And I think particularly when you look at things like venture capital space or private equity space, where um, a lot of times the expectation is large. So the expectation might be that, anything underneath a 10 million a year company, isn't necessarily successful. So a lot of times you'll come in contact with these founders that have large expectations, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because, everybody likes, large success. But I think sometimes we get distracted by what we think what that means or what we are trying to prove. Does that mean I'm big? Does that mean I'm super special? So being able to keep that humility across the journey, and really not be distracted by all the lures, because moderate success can bring a lot of distractions in and of itself, right? So you get your first 100,000, you get your first, 200-300,000. You can all of a sudden be distracted in ways you couldn't before.
What do people get distracted by?
A lot of things. Listen, to be totally transparent, when I was a young person working on Wall Street, most people get distracted by drugs. But it could come in multiple forms. A lot of people, material items. So if you are, you want to prove yourself by leveraging yourself and getting that big house or that big car, or being host to your family. Like, hey, I want to, buy my cousin this, or I want to, buy my auntie that. I think a lot of times it's personal, and you end up getting unwound by whatever it is your own personal insecurities are. So it's a bit of a balance, especially when you're talking about populations of color, where we're often coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, and there's a lot of other trauma and issues in the background. So it's all sorts of things.
Okay. And yeah, I'll ask you that because I do want to segue into that. I know that you talk about in your nonprofit, the working with the disadvantaged entrepreneur, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so, how do I say it? Like, what are the differences that you find in, I guess, minority or people of color entrepreneurs and, non, so to speak? Like what are their differences? I guess that whether it's in struggles or whether it's in whatever the differences are in.
A lot of differences. I think mainly resource, exposure, connections, access.
Okay.
And it's not just, and we work with entrepreneurs everywhere. So we've got like entrepreneurs that we work with in Nigeria and Brazil and everywhere. So it's not so much the American construct, because a lot of times you could talk to this one entrepreneur doesn't have access to electricity 24 hours a day. Like where she is, she only has access to electricity 5 hours out of the day. So, it could be very different challenges. Working with some entrepreneurs in Nigeria who don't always have access to 24 hours of internet access. And so a lot of times you can face different levels of challenges. I think that the geographic a lot of times is a big challenge, but also just immediate resources. Whether or not you have enough funds to buy that initial set of t-shirts you want to sell, or have enough access to the sort of laptop you need to make the videos you want for your brand, or being able to pay subscription for your Gmail, or all those sorts of things that you don't always think of can be significant barriers when the benchmark or the threshold for the initial level of investment might be out of reach.
Wow. What are you, I mean, I know every situation is different, every story, every person, every interaction you have is different, but what do you find yourself maybe in some common denominator? What do you find yourself having to help people through as maybe, I don't know, maybe it's, I don't know if it's different as initial entrepreneurs, like the novices, or if it's different if they're more experienced. But what do you feel? I don't know if there are any connections or common denominators. What do you feel like you do most often, or you feel like is almost like just par for the course when you're dealing with someone, just dealing with someone?
I think one of the most common challenges for entrepreneurs is emotional fatigue. I think
Okay.
the level of belief that needs to be maintained long term
Oh,
can
okay. Okay.
be draining, specifically when you're in a leadership position. So whether
Oh,
you're a
okay.
founder, you're an entrepreneur, you've got this venture for which you are the leader. And in many instances, there's not a lot of belief. There may not be a lot of support. And you want to know what? A lot of times, reason would say that you shouldn't be doing what you should do. Like a lot of times when you look at a lot of entrepreneurial ventures, who would have thought, like, say, for instance, Airbnb, when the guys first had an idea, like, yeah, I'm gonna get strangers, and strangers are gonna stay with strangers, and we're gonna put hotels out of business. You would have thought
Right.
that's crazy. No, you shouldn't do that. You should go be a doctor. So a lot of times
Right.
you're in these scenarios where you've got these unbelievable things that you're believing in, and those things can be very challenging to keep up long term. Like there's this story of the woman who swam the English Channel. I forget her name, but she made multiple attempts to swim the English Channel, and one of the last times she was cramping, and she was like she couldn't go, and she gave up. But everybody in the boat who could see how close she was, they were like, "Just keep going, you're almost there." But she didn't believe them, and then she gave up. And when she saw how close she was crying, because she was like, "I could have made it." And I think we are like that, specifically in entrepreneurial journeys. You feel like giving up, but there's not always someone there with the external view to say, no, you're only 5 feet away from that next hit, or you're only 5 days away or 5 weeks away. So the most common thing I see is people give up too soon. People get challenged, and it's tough to keep up long term. Um, but the journey it's a marathon, as the wise Nipsey Hussle said.
Yes,
it's,
sir.
it's a marathon.
Yes, sir. So it's kind of a two-part question. One then is how do you know when it's how do you know I'm going to use the word. How do you know when to give up? I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but
That's
how
a
do
fair,
you
yeah.
know
It's a
how do you
fair.
know when you're like, okay, this is just not reasonable, or I have the wrong idea, or like how do you know that, right? And then the next thing is for you as the coach of these leaders, so to speak. How do you decide or determine what's a bad idea? Or like, what's when somebody comes to you and you're like, man, what in the hell? What? Like, what makes you say that? Is it them? Is it the idea? Is it so those two things is one, how do you know when you should just say, okay, I'm not gonna make it? Or I should stop or whatever. And then two, how do you as the leader of these people determine when somebody comes to you, whether they come to you with a viable thing or not?
Listen, I one of the things that I know is that I don't know. I
Okay.
just like that with that entrepreneur that I was talking about, who I was like, I remember when I was telling him all the challenges. And it's funny, it's an example of it's all in how somebody processes. Because I was saying that's impossible because of those reasons. And how he received it was it's possible because I can fix those reasons.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it's all up to the person. I never know. There's things that I didn't think people could do, and I've seen them do it. So
Yeah.
I rarely encounter or feel confident saying that's not going to work. I can't, I know I can't say that because people surprise me all the time. I can, I think what I know doesn't work is when people don't accept responsibility. That's when I'm talking to someone, and if I give them feedback and they say, well, that's impossible because so and so and so. Or if they say, well, that won't work because they won't let me, or this person won't do what I need them to do. And so that won't work. When you don't accept accountability, that usually is a distinguishing factor. When I look back historically, when I sort of note the folks that have been able to achieve versus not, usually it's those who practice, I think what they call it, radical responsibility, absolute responsibility. Like, I am going to take on this challenge and see it through no matter what. Um, in response to the other piece of your question, in terms of when do you know when it's time to give up, um, again, that is super personal. I think it's almost like a marriage. When do you give
Oh.
up on a marriage? When do you give up on a child? Like,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There's
Yeah. Yeah.
no. It depends on what your reason is. Um, like, if it is like, I wanted to do this because I thought it would make me a millionaire, and now it won't, then maybe not. Maybe you give up on that. But if you have a mission, if you have a journey, and so, like, when I do what I do because I liken it to the things my heroes have done. And when I say people like Spike Lee, that I would consider him a hero, and he doesn't give up in the face of challenge. He wouldn't uh, deny his mission because it didn't yield a certain amount of dollar. You look at leaders and heroes and change makers, and some of the most successful that achieve the scale that a lot of us aspire to do so relentlessly over decades. so,
Right.
so I think that's the aim. I think the aim is to do what you do relentlessly over decades. If you do it, you will achieve a certain mastery. If you achieve a certain level of mastery, you will achieve a certain level of recognition. If you achieve a certain level of recognition, then whatever else you want is yours. If you want to translate that into dollars, you can. If you want to translate that into change and impact, you can. But I think those are the things. Define your mission, pursue it relentlessly. I say for an undefined amount of time. Like, Jay-Z's never going to give up rapping. He tried, but I don't think he's going to stop. So if
Right.
that if that's
Right.
your lane, I would say don't back down. Would be, and that's how I advise founders. And I think that's the ones who lose are the ones who back down. Would be my experience.
Okay. So I think you kind of touched on a couple probably pieces of the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. If you're a young person, say you're in, I don't know, not too young, but let's just say you're in 10th grade, 11th grade, and you just feel like, I'm a hustler. Like, this is just what I do. You know what I mean? I'm selling candy. shoestrings. I'm selling t-shirts, wave caps. Just like that's just my thing. Like I like the thrill, the rush. So you have like that entrepreneurial, kind of Jones in you, right? What what are some things that you can do at maybe a young age like that maybe isn't drop out of school or maybe isn't stand all night on the corner, but what do you think are some things that they can do at that age and they can get access to at that age to kind of set themselves up to be in a position to end up like you?
Yeah. I think great question. I think one of the most impactful things that someone can do at that age is to set up a brand. So all they've got all the tools and resources. So let's say I'm in the 10th grade and I like basketball. And if I'm like, there's all the tools and resources to say, for instance, set up your social media pages and aggregate content. I think that's the first sort of like entry point. For a lot of reasons, content is the greatest aggregator of audience. And so you're always, in order to be a hustler entrepreneur, you're always going to have an audience. And really, if you were to translate that into real terms, is I am a connector.
Okay.
I am a connector, whether it be product, community, resources, services. You're, a hustler. You're connecting people with whether it is where they should go for the parties, where they should go to get the drip, or where where they should be. And so the easiest way to leverage that is with a brand. Summarize it with a name or some sort of phrase and start to own that, because then from there you can start to own that across the different platforms. So you get your YouTube. I think that's probably one of the best places to start to monetize. With YouTube, you can actually monetize it not only through the content, but a lot of folks are taking that brand and they're selling merch. So you'll see the little banners at the bottom where they're selling merch. They're driving through affiliates. Because in this day and age, it's all an ecosystem. And so if you create a brand, you create opportunities to create connections in that ecosystem. So if you got brand X, put that brand X on YouTube. Then you start to get affiliate links and populate your YouTube with your affiliate links. Then you can get a Shopify store. And all of these things can be done at low or no cost. So it's a really good time to be able to take advantage of the technology. But I think that's probably where you start. Just leverage your brand and figure out the ecosystem of figuring out your payment processors, your whoever is going to be paying you. Are you going to be doing shout outs? Are you going to be doing affiliate deals? Or are you going to be selling merch? Decide your lane. And from there, it's wide open. Age doesn't have to be a prohibitive factor anymore.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So now we're gonna go back. Gonna go a little higher up in the elevation. What is a venture capitalist? To somebody who doesn't know, and I'll just throw myself in there just because I want to learn something. What
Yes.
is a venture capitalist? When somebody says, "Oh, I'm a venture capitalist," or when a young 10th graders looking at TV and they're watching, one of these super high level TV shows and like, "Oh, I'm a VC, I'm a venture capitalist." What does that mean?
So that means you help companies raise money and secure funds.
Okay.
So there's two sides to the financial industry in terms of uh, uh, banking. You've got venture capital, and then you've got private equity. The difference being private equity usually deals with more mature companies. So, say for instance, if you owned a bunch of garages. If you're in California, like I got 10 garages. And then maybe like a private equity group might go around and secure mature businesses to roll them up and scale them in profitability. Um, Venture capital deals with seed stage companies, so new companies.
Okay.
So being able to take a company basically either from seed idea or very early stage development and structure that so it has the opportunity to really scale usually to the tune of like say 10 to 20 million. Sometimes you take them public and you go through the various stages of capital raising to take them all the way to being an actual public company.
Wow. Okay. Okay. And what does what is a, I guess, a potential company that this could be done for, so to speak? What do they, what does that aspiring entrepreneur or what do you look for, I guess, as a venture capitalist? And what does a company that you're looking at, what are you looking for, and what do they have to look like? I guess, what do they have to be in order to, what is that relationship?
Fair question. So I think every every VC has a different lens or perspective. It's called what you call a thesis. So it means really like, how do you know how to make money, basically?
Okay.
So
Yes.
it would be different. So some people might be in real estate and they know real estate very well. Some people might be in healthcare and they know healthcare very well. And so they can identify what a good company in terms of healthcare looks like. And they know how to grow that in that vertical. I'm in the tech and media vertical. So
Okay.
I specifically look at companies that can scale in the tech and media space.
Okay.
So to answer your question on what does that look like, I'd look at companies that specifically have an online product, online service, or online presence, because the tech space, whether it be software as a service or content, you can scale it. Like it's different from, say, a cheeseburger shop, where if I've got a cheeseburger shop on one quarter and I know I can crank out 500 cheeseburgers in a day, I can't really scale that. I can't really, if 2,000 people show up, I can't serve 2,000. I can only serve
Okay.
500.
Okay.
But if I've got
Okay.
a software product, if I've got a media product, if 2,000 people show up, I can serve 2,000. If 200,000 people show up, I can serve 200,000. It
Okay.
scales, the technology scales. And so
Okay.
I personally focus on a technology portfolio. Um, our portfolio is a little bit different in that we are focused on um, companies that do public good. So we've chosen to focus on financial and business literacy in our portfolio. So a lot of our portfolio holdings are going to be specifically focused in that area, just to get some efficiency between having so many brands that focus on a specific category. So for us, that's our particular thesis. I think for the most part, a lot of VCs are focused in the tech category just because of the potential for scale. Like at this point, it gives you the most opportunity to be able to grow a company from zero to, a million in the shortest amount of time.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. I know another thing that was in your bio was your, I know what you kind of touched on it a little bit right now, but I know another thing that was in your bio was your community work,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right? And as far as like, and so what does that look like to you as far as being in the venture capital space or being in the media tech space? Like, what is your desired influence in the community?
Um, it's interesting. So I think it's maturing and it's changing. I think
Okay.
previously for so long, coming from such a defined corporate background, I always
Okay.
looked at this corporate construct as like the answer. And so previously, my mission had always been to mentor and groom new talent to fit into this corporate construct. And I would answer all your problems and get a big corporate job and, do this thing. Um, Now, what I'm finding is um, it's probably of more value to prepare people for this new world. I think the world is dramatically changing, just whether it is remote working is now a standard. You've got AI that's probably going to take half the jobs anyway. Then you've got, a lot of just the construct of work changing. So I think the motivation is to give a new generation the tools for this new landscape, which, to be honest, is changing more and more every day. But I think we try, and that's one of the reasons why we're trying to establish these platforms that at least serve as a repository for learning, at least serve as resources and tools that can support as the landscape changes. So yeah, we're just trying to really just kind of support as we learn more, but also even from a global perspective. So when we started, we were mostly focused on North American audience, but then as you get exposure to just the global landscape, that changes as well in terms of how you have to look at the composition of teams and how you have to look at the new model of some of these businesses as you look at the global aspect and a lot of the different resource access levels when you bring that into account. I don't know if that answers your question there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like to just hear your own take on what you. Yeah, no, it's perfect. How has? Well, let me back that up. When you went to the cool kid side, the media side and things like that, what do you think? What skills or abilities or experiences that you had in leaving the stock market side that you went into the media side with? What do you think? What of those helped you make the transition, or when you got into it?
The big thing probably was my facility with numbers and being able to understand business concepts. So I think when I got to the cool kid side, and I've done work in film, publishing, music, television, advertising, everything, and across the board, a lot of time creatives have difficulty wrapping their head around the business aspect of what the deliverables are and what the engagement is. So the leg up I had was understanding business principles and having a little bit of discipline. So that enabled me to get into the work, the side of managing the whole production and being like a producer and being an executive producer and managing end-to-end campaigns, and the scope of your remit gets larger and larger, or got larger and larger, because of my ability to manage the business aspect, not just be the creative and have a good idea, but actually understand the deliverables, time implications, budget implications, understanding how to take a certain amount of budget, deliver a product, and measure profitability over the course of time, but also the discipline to build a business year over year when you're, whether it be a brand or a television show or a magazine or whatever, being able to take a project and operate it to where it realizes growth year over year. A lot of people don't have that scope to see 3, 4, 5 years at a time, and be able to incrementally build. I think a lot of times people look at success as like a pop, like, oh, I'm going to blow up. I'm a pop.
Yeah.
It has a habit like that. Sometimes you have to look back and say, okay, this year I'm going to do this to facilitate that opportunity. And then that opportunity I'm going to work on for next year. And then that's going to build up there. I think being able to understand the principles and have the discipline to just work and see through long-term goals was a big advantage.
Okay. And what about now? What about now that you're on this side? What lessons or experiences that you've had have What if, how has that informed your life experience now? Like what is that? Maybe it's a little bit different question, but how is this really, how has this shaped your perspective or your understanding or, whatever you want to say? How has that, how has that helped or shaped, or what has it done?
I'll tell you one thing. And so it's funny. It's funny. I went last year. I worked with a coach, and so a lot of times, whether it be specific coaching or specific mentoring, that helps. Um, and I think, and it might sound funny, I think therapy helps because I think a lot of times when you get to the higher levels of performance, you know what you're doing. You're not. It's not whether or not you can execute. It's not whether or not you're disciplined. It's not whether or not you're intelligent or trained. A lot of times, it's your own personal undoing. Can you overcome yourself? Can you manage to repair relationships that you don't want to repair? Can you reach that higher level? So I think that has been a big help in overcoming myself. And when I say overcoming myself, I think previously when you're a high performer, you lean on that, right? If you know how to do
Yes.
something well, you lean on the fact that you do something well. And so that
Yes,
can
sir.
be a hindrance when building a team and trusting others. So like right
Okay.
now, it's not whether or not I can build a great business, it's whether or not I can build other people up to build a great business. And so part of that, I have to learn how to step back. I
Okay.
have to learn how to not solve every problem. I have to. It's sometimes
Yes,
it's
sir.
hard when it's almost like when you have a kid. Like sometimes, like my son, I've got a 9-year old,
Yes.
and I remember when he was learning how to tie his shoes. You always have the inclination to just tie it for him because they're
Yes, sir.
struggling, and you gotta go, and it's like, oh, we gotta go. Like I can't. So it's like you just want to tie it for them. Yeah. But they'll never learn. If you
Yes, sir.
solve every problem, they're never going to learn. And so being able to stand by um, and not solve all the problems that you could, because you see things and you want to jump in and you want to say, or you'll be party to a call that where you're like, oh, he should have said it this way. You might want to jump in and save it. But maybe don't. Maybe let that person learn and maybe let that person struggle. Um, and so that has been a learning curve for me, um, to stand back and let leaders mature, versus jumping in and always saving the day when you know you can save it. Um, but in that, you have to personally mature to not feel you have to prove yourself all the time. Your personal reputation, you have to have a certain sense of security where you're not like super pressed that everything go your way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's been the learning curve. Trusting others to mature and lead in their own style, I think it's been the biggest learning curve, but it's been the thing that has yielded the most benefit because, and I think I was remarking with my wife. So our anniversary was this past week,
Oh,
and so
congratulations.
thank you. And so we just I took the week off. I took like a week and a half off, and we're just like hanging out. And so I remarked, like, this is like the first time in a long time I've been able to step away from work and not have like urgent fires in the back of my mind.
Right.
But it's a testament to the team that I put in place for the last year or so. I haven't been putting out every fire for them. So they're more than capable when I step away to be able to manage and lead independently. So had it not been for that learning and putting that into place, I think being the answer to every fire would have burned me out. And to be transparent, like, so I, when I was younger, I was in my 30s, mid 30s, I started an agency. It was a successful agency. We're in downtown Manhattan. We had an office right across the street from World Trade Center. We had nice clients. We had JP Morgan Chase, we had Abbott Labs, and a couple of others. We had an office in New York City, one in the UK, and then a back office in Ukraine as well. We had a development team in the Ukraine. But at the time, and I was a younger entrepreneur, and at the time, I made myself the answer to every problem. And so I had trained my team to always look to me as the answer to every problem. And I think that eventually burned me out being the answer. And so I think now I'm not necessarily the answer. And so what that does is it creates an infrastructure where you don't have to grind yourself down to the ground all the time.
Yes, sir.
You can start to think in a different context. Like you can think about the future and what the best growth opportunities are. You're not necessarily thinking about daily deliverables and, oh my God, is this going to be later? Or do we have to make that meeting or whatever it is? Like you can start to take yourself out of that and be more of a visionary, you know, they say. But I think that's been the biggest learning curve, and once learned has produced the biggest yield in terms of expanding what I can do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How do you figure out, or how do you decide what or who to say yes or no to? Like in your business, like how do you figure out, you know, what you should say yes or no to, or whom you should say yes or no to? How do you make that, you know, that those kind of decisions?
So to a lot of my commitments, I have let's say I have a construct. And so for some part, in terms of when it comes to demands on my time, I have just almost like day parting. So I just have segments of my day that are allocated to certain things, whether it be meeting new founders, this is this time, operations on the business, this is this time. And then, you know, whether it be, you know, financial operations, I have everything is time segmented. And I try to plot out my calendar 4 months in advance. Like I have 4 months of calendar.
Okay.
I try to plot it out 4 months in advance. And if it doesn't fit in there, I usually don't do it. And I don't beat myself up. Like I don't have to do everything. I decide what I'm going to do. And typically if it's outside of that, I don't do it. And yeah, I just say no.
And that comes with, would you say that comes with time and experience, or confidence, or where, like, how did you get out of beating yourself up and, like you said, becoming the answer to everything?
Yeah, a little bit of time and experience. I tell you, you know, I've been there. I've been the guy. Dude, I've been the guy working around the clock, trying to chase every opportunity and meet every deliverable. I've been that guy. Sometimes you have to let it go. You have to let it go and come to terms with yourself, and be okay with yourself. Sometimes I think it's those insecurities of whether it's like, and it gets personal, right? Because sometimes you're trying to prove things not only to yourself. Sometimes you might be trying to prove it to your parents. Sometimes you might be trying to prove it to your wife. Sometimes you might be trying to prove it to your kids. You might be trying to prove it to your friends. And I've gone through a couple of like mastermind groups, and the benefit of that was having access to a lot of C-level executives and seeing what that looks like 10, 20 years down the road, and talking to the dude who's got more money than he knows what to do with, and say, it's not worth it. When you get to see and have access to that, you get to kind of understand you may be trying to make a bargain that's not worth it. But you got to be happy with yourself. Like you got to be satisfied. Like if you're not satisfied, then nothing's ever enough. You'll always be running. You have to kind of face yourself. You have to face yourself. Some people are trying to run away from themselves or buy themselves a better car and thinking that's going to change it. That's you're going to be the same dude in that next car. Right. You're going to be the same dude. Right. Same just cat. With bigger bills. So, you know, you have to be okay with yourself, because a lot of people aren't okay. So that's why a lot of people are trying to, buy their way into happiness. So they, they'll take a cool Instagram photo, and all of a sudden they're respectable. You have to be happy with who you are today.
Mm-hmm. So, you mentioned, your son, you mentioned being married, and, the personal life, right? So how how have you found your life to be different, your personal life to be different, or is it? If so, is there a difference in your personal life when you were, let's just assume you stayed with the stock market, let's just say longer, where you had these same things you have now, wife, family, versus being an entrepreneur with a wife and the family. Is there a difference in that life? Not necessarily a stockbroker, but I mean like just working for someone else, so to speak, being a 9 to 5, but a very high level, employee like that, or having your own, or being an entrepreneur. Is there a difference in the way your work life balance or life balance, or does that exist? Is that real? What is that experience? What
It
do you
is
think?
real. So it's something to that you have to work on. I think the big distinction would be, like, let's call them high performance individuals.
Okay.
Because I think whether or not you're in the financial service industry, or if you're in media and technology, or if you're working for yourself, I think a lot of times, if you're a high performance individual, you'll drive yourself to extraordinary lengths wherever you are. There's always, like, if you're trying to chase a bonus or some, KPIs that your board has dreamed up or whatever, there's always a reason to to go through these extraordinary lengths to achieve these things that you've set for yourself. I think a lot of times type A personalities are prone to it, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think that's fine. I think for myself, and I'll be totally transparent. Like, I'll be totally transparent. Like, my current marriage is my second marriage. I had a first marriage where I was working. We were both working. She was an attorney. I had an agency, and we were both working at the expense of that marriage. I think second time, for a while, a second marriage, I worked long hours. Um, I think once I got to point, I came to a point where I had to make personal commitment to myself, not to work like that
Right, right,
anymore.
right, right,
So
right.
now, and one person, an entrepreneur, he gave me the idea of being an entrepreneur with the aim of structuring your life and finances so where you have all the security and things that a 9 to 5er has. Like, just because you're an entrepreneur doesn't mean you have to work around the clock. Doesn't mean you can't have a sign off time. Doesn't mean you can't have predictable income. Like, all these things we think about entrepreneurship don't have to be the case. I think the mission is to be an entrepreneur and afford yourself stability, afford yourself a 9 to 5. Like, listen, I don't even work. I mean, I work. I get up at 4 in the morning. I get up at 4 in the morning, and then usually I try to sign off about 4 o'clock. It's 3, 4. But and for me, like 3 o'clock, my kid gets out of school. I go with him. We get ice cream or whatever, and do math homework or whatever, and then I'm done. Like, I'm not trying to sacrifice the quality of life, because that's what you're doing it for. Like, for me, you're doing it to be able to have good times with your family. So it
Yes,
would
sir.
be a shame to miss out on the thing that you're working for.
Yes, sir.
So for me personally, I just adhere to strict rules. Like, I knock off about 4 o'clock. I always have dinner with my family. I don't do any work after like 6 o'clock. I don't even check email. I don't even look at cell phones.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I have an iPhone that I walk around the house with, like, for music and YouTube, but it's not even connected to like service. Like, I couldn't get a
Okay.
text message if I tried.
Right,
So
right, right.
I'm
Okay.
not cut off. Like, if it's outside of working hours, I just totally cut off.
Yes.
But for me, it makes it possible to do it as a marathon, because I think otherwise you get burned out. Then it's like, oh, I got to rest. And then next thing you know, you've taken a month off, and it's like, oh, you're in this spin, this up and down and up and down. Um, for me, I try to even it out to make it something that you can do, hopefully for a really long time, for like decades. Like, this is just the beginning. You got like, what, Rupert Murdoch? You know who Rupert Murdoch is?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
dude's like, what, 90s, in his 90s?
Yeah. He still owns the Dodgers, right?
He owns a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Newspapers and yeah.
Yeah. So I think for me, whether you look at folks like him or Warren Buffett, or just a lot of these iconic folks that do this for their entire lives and have that longevity, I think part of it is really just understanding you can't. How many times in a row can you stay up all night? How many?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're sacrificing things that you shouldn't. So I try to keep it as even keel as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you come up with ideas?
So I have tools. So I think, and part of it is, so it's so I'll go through the life cycle. So
Okay.
last year we decided to establish the Republic, and I think that was probably the biggest period of coming up with ideas. And for me, I'm familiar with it, having worked in the creative industry. You're given a product and you put in a room and you come up with ideas. A lot of times, there's a lot of strategic thinking around the problem you're trying to solve. And so usually you have a problem that you're trying to solve. And usually that's where the idea comes from, is specifically how to meet this objective. And so for us, we qualify the Republic as almost like a public service company. And
Okay.
so for us, the genesis of an idea is the problem. And so for us, we've defined in terms of our thesis that financial literacy and business literacy to be our problem. And so for us, it's the nuggets of where do friction points lie. So if you're doing something, there's always what you call like a friction point. So say, for instance, when developing a website, maybe, or a book or something, sometimes developing large scale content might be the friction point. Like, people get the idea and they understand what they want to do, but then, they have a difficult time figuring out how to go from outline to fleshed out content. And so we would say, oh, that's a pain point. So we will develop either a product or a process to address that pain point. And so we find out who has that problem. We solve that problem, and then we have either a product or agency process that we can offer as a service to answer that issue. So for us as a business, ideas are usually connected with problems versus, like, say, traditional creative that might just come up with a song for the sake of having a song. We usually are driven by market issues, which we call.
Oh, okay. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. And just kind of like, I mean, it's part of the business, but on maybe a tertiary part, maybe it can't be the peripheral part. It's part of the business, but how do you hire people? What do you look for when you're hiring? Because, like you talked about, not being the guy with the answer all the time, and having a good team, and so that you can turn your phone off and have a weekend and everything like that. How do you how do you hire people? What is meaningful to you? What do you look for? Things like that.
Um, I think, let's say, curiosity, specifically because we focus a lot on um, technology, an intersection between technology and business and financial literacy. So there's a
Okay.
lot of, whether it be on the tech side, how we build products, there's a lot of just new innovation that's necessary, just to stay competitive. So we look for a lot of young people who are like the young people who are always just doing things. Like I got young people on my LinkedIn that are always coming up with just new side projects, like, oh, I built this website or I built this app or whatever. Folks that are already doing it just because, usually we'll identify people like that, people that are building and doing already. Even if it is on, like on the financial services side, we met this one founder who was on a college campus already hosting literacy classes with people in his dorm because he had such a passion for, spreading the information. And so we look for people who are mission driven and are probably already doing that thing.
Mhm.
um it solves a lot of problems. It's yeah, that usually is a big tell.
Okay. Okay. Um, how do you know, like, how do you know how do you know when it's time to pivot? Like you knew from the stock to getting into the media and the tech and everything like that. What are your own signals, flares, right? Or whatever they are for you, where you're like, I think I either want to do something different or I want to add something to, maybe it's your personal or professional life, but just kind of when you feel like something needs to be shaken up a little bit. What is that like for you?
um there's two reasons to pivot. It's either going to be something about the marketplace, like something dramatically changes in the marketplace, or something dramatically changes about you. so,
Yes. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
like I'll tell you one time, like when I was young, I had a magazine. Was always big in publishing, and I had a magazine. It was called Black Medina. It was like
Okay.
poetry and entertainment and all that stuff.
Okay.
Um, and we're trying to get. It was before the internet had really taken off. That's how old.
Okay.
But
Okay.
we're trying to get shelf space in bookstores and magazine stores and all that stuff. And the internet had just come up, and so I put up a website just to like have a landing page for the magazine. And then, I would talk to people. I'd be pitching the magazine, and then I'd send them an email, and then I just put the website up so I would have some place to send them to say, hey, this is the type of stuff we do. So we put up a landing page, and I'm trying to get this print magazine on shelves. And then, meanwhile, the website is blowing up, and people are like, every day, people would be like, I love your online magazine. It's so great. And I would every day reply, it's not an online magazine. It's a real magazine, and you should buy it. and so, but one day, I realized, why not an online? why,
Right.
why not?
Right. You're getting mad and everything.
Yeah.
Like, are you not listening?
And
Right.
so one day I was like, all right, I forget this paper and stuff. I'm gonna be an online magazine, and I did, like the Google ads and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And with that online magazine, I was able to pay off all my college loans with that one magazine. Like
Wow.
one summer, it was just like boom. And I was
Right.
like, that was a pivot. That was just a dramatic shift in the marketplace. There was new technology. People were developing new habits. So people weren't necessarily going to the shelves anymore to
Yes.
find what was hot. So I had to
Yeah.
pivot.
Yeah.
Um, Another time that's the opposite was a dramatic change in me was, I remember when I first got married, initially I had an independent agency and I was working around the clock. and that couldn't be the case anymore. And so there I went and, joined a larger agency group that gave me a little bit more structure and resources, so I didn't have to be by myself and running myself into the ground. But that pivot was in response into a dramatic shift in me, dramatic shift in my priorities, and sometimes that happens too. So those are the two things. Usually, it's either a dramatic shift in the marketplace, whether it be because of technology or people's habits, that doesn't work anymore, or dramatic shift in you. It's like, I have to choose the best life or best choice for myself in this circumstance. So usually either one of those. A lot of times outside of those two things, a lot of times people just get tired and discouraged and figure something else is going to be a better opportunity or a faster track to money. That's why it's important to define whether you're doing it for money or not. Like, are you about the money or the mission? If you're not getting the money, then yeah, you would say I should quit because I'm not getting the money. But if it's really about the mission, usually you find a way to make it work, whether it be changing the platform, changing the delivery channels, or whatever. If it's about the mission, usually you'll find a way to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, the magazine one, that was the one of the day. It's like, what? This is not an online magazine.
Oh, it was hot. I'll be hot every day. I'll be hot. And I was like, finally, why are you fighting this? Why
are you fighting this?
The world is changing.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. That is awesome. That was a good one. So, well, good. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I got two more questions.
Sure.
So what is, I mean, you still, like you said, you have Rupert Murdoch and Warren Buffett, and, so you still obviously have a long time left, but what do you want to, I don't want to say, what do you just want to, you could say either leave as a legacy, but not even necessarily for others, but for yourself. What do you want to feel like you did with your life in this space, you're with what you did with your professional life when you lay it down? What do you want to feel like that you want to say about it, or you want to think about it, or maybe you want to leave something? I don't know, but what do you want to feel like, or leave, or say, or sound like? I don't know, whatever it is for you. When you feel like you're done, what is success to you? What would make you say, I achieved, I finished a race? What is that for you?
I think, you've got all the standard things like, family and all those things. You want to be able to provide a secure future and all that other good stuff. But I think in terms of personal legacy, personal profile, I think the story of just persevering through tough times, so that it does get tough. There's no one who's not going to be challenged. I remember, so I went to officer candidate school for the Marines, going to fly. My father was a Marine, and so I was going to do that. I didn't eventually go and be a Marine, but I went to officer candidate school. And I remember they said nobody gets through this unchallenged, no matter how prepared you are. Because like at that point in time, I was like 19, and I was all jacked and smart and just the best at everything. It's like the best in every way. And so you're like,
I'm ready. Yeah.
But they tell you, like, no matter who you are, you're going to get challenged. The weak guys are going to get challenged. The strong guys are going to challenge. The smart guys are going to get challenged, and the dumb guys are going to get challenged. Everybody's going to realize that you need to be tough to get through this, that you need to come together as a team, that you need to rise above wherever you thought you were. And so I think that legacy, I would say, would be what I would want to be germane or core to the imprint that I leave behind. It's a tough one. And I think for like a lot of the entrepreneurs that I work with, I think I probably have the most heart for the ones that go through tough and challenging things. But I think that breeds a certain type of person. I think people who go through hard things end up being people who can do hard things. And I think the world needs people who can do hard things. Um, and so that would be I would say the legacy is being able to do hard things.
Mm-hmm. And so, how will you know when it's time to quit? Meaning, not quit literally, but how when you know you're like, you know what, I've had enough. I want to just, sit on the porch with my lemonade and just chill with my wife. Like, is that for you, or is it like, no, I'm working till they wheel me up out of here,
Yeah,
right?
I think that's why it's so important to have liberty, or some would say autonomy, or just the ability to determine what working looks like for you.
Okay.
So for me, like, I've gone to great lengths to sort of like unpeel the stressors, or at least how I process
Okay.
things as stress.
Okay. Okay.
I've gone to great lengths to make sure that the projects I'm involved in give me life. Like, like
Okay.
if it,
Yes, sir.
if it's something that gives you life, I don't think you get tired the same way if you're
Okay.
around people um, who inspire you just by the quality of person they are. Like, those things are, I
Okay.
think those things are important. So I think when you put those things in place, when you're inspired by the quality of people, when you're inspired by the work product, you don't run out, because you don't get the same, it's not the same experience. It's an experience you couldn't live without. Like, you're having
Uh-huh.
exhilarating experiences where you're like, oh my God, can't wait to do that again. Or, oh man, next year when that happens again, it's going to be so fantastic. So I think the aim is to build businesses that give you life. If not, and put yourself into positions, and that goes along with self-care, right? Like, if you're
Mhm.
not taking care of yourself, of course it's going to be a day when you have to hang it up, because you can't you can't do that for too long. Like, you need to rest. But if
Right.
you're practicing self-care, if you're building great experiences that inspire you, then I think your longevity is different. Like, we mentioned Warren Buffett. When you look at um, his office, I think his office, he has a small office with staff of about 25 people, and they've been the same 25 people for the past 25 years.
Wow.
So that's like family. And so, when you're around good quality people that understand what they're doing, and everybody's contributing, and just morale is high. Those are the things that really are important, that I try to focus on, is just like the quality of relationships. Are people empathizing? Or, like, how are you dealing with people? Because if you've got toxicity in the workplace, that's not going to work. You're going to want to hang it up. You're going to be like, oh, I want to sit next to my wife and drink this Kool-Aid. But if you've got really quality relationships, really inspiring work, I think it gives you a little bit more time. You probably won't even be thinking about it. I'm trying to,
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
go all the
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Wow. Well, one more. This is the last question, I promise, but I can't. I'd be remiss if I let you go without asking this, because I want you to define it. You define venture capitalist. I want you to define for all of us what, in your own words, however, whatever you think it is, what is an entrepreneur, and and it's, I would say for anyone, but maybe you can kind of flavor some of the attributes age wise. Maybe, like, I'm sure there's similarities, but maybe for someone starting at 50, it may be different for someone starting at 15, right? But if you had to define the word entrepreneur and just some of the skills, like, if you're an entrepreneur, this is what I say, this is what I think that word means. And these are the traits, some of them, or at least a couple of them that I think are important for any type of entrepreneur to reach their goal?
I think I like how you put the age perspective on it, because it changes as you evolve as a person. But I think first, people who seek to close the gap. And when I was talking before about the problems and the friction points, and I'll
Okay.
use that, let's say the first stage, because I'll use my son as an example. He's 9, he's
Okay.
fourth grade. He started out in fourth grade. He goes and he discovered origami and Chinese stars.
Okay.
You remember as a kid,
Yes.
you make the
Yes.
Chinese stars?
Yes. Yes. I tried.
So here's the point. So he's really good at origami. He watches the YouTube videos and makes his Chinese stars. And he goes to school and he's like, oh, Dad, I was so popular. I'm like make the best Chinese stars, and the other kids, they couldn't figure it out. I make Chinese stars. And so I just went after lunch. I came to my desk and I set up a sign in the store. It says, Thaddeus's origami shop. Get your Chinese stars, $1.
Okay.
I think that initial ability to identify a problem, to identify a friction point, like, oh, these kids want these Chinese stars, but he can't fold his paper. I'm going to be the guy to give them this thing and solve this problem.
Yes.
So I think that's the key piece. That's the key piece to entrepreneurship, is being willing to stand in the gap. Because a lot of people will see the problem and say, yeah, that sucks. They should go study for themselves and make Chinese stars. And just continue on. Like, I got Chinese stars for myself. But I think the entrepreneur's heart and the entrepreneur's spirit seeks to say, I'm going to stand in that gap. I'm going to facilitate the stars. I think a lot of times we contextualize it and put a money aspect to it. I think we put a money and an autonomy aspect to it. But I think usually those things are afterthoughts. They're outgrowths of being able to successfully fill the gap. If you fill the gap, you can do it on your own terms, and you can do it for how much ever money you want, because you've successfully filled the gap. I think a lot of times we are attracted by wanting to charge whatever money and do it on our own schedule and say, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur because I want money and I want to do it on my own terms. Mm-hmm. But I think the real core piece is filling the gap.
So you're saying there's an order to it?
Yeah, I think that there's that one thing, filling that gap.
Okay.
Everything else is an outgrowth of being able to successfully fill that gap. But if you fill that gap, then you can charge whatever you want and you can set your own schedule. But you have to be able to identify and fill that gap. So I think that's the core to entrepreneurship.
Okay.
I think as you get older and more sophisticated, there's other elements that come into play. Specifically, how business is conducted in our North American construct, whether it be the difference between an LLC and an S Corp and a C Corp, and understanding and navigating those core aspects of what it means to administer a business. So beyond, once you say, oh, I can identify this thing and I can sell this thing, I can please a market, there's the business administration piece that comes into setting up your company and making sure you have the proper licenses, and how do you scope or facilitate your relationships with your customers or other businesses, and your terms of service and the logistics and your pricing models. There becomes a lot of technical things that you have to get into in terms of the administration of business. And I think that's the second sort of like ceiling that a lot of people hit, is they can do their thing well, but can you administer well? Can you build a good company with a good balance sheet that has the intellectual assets that provide value and security? So I think once you hit that second level, there's the administration. And then beyond that, the next layer is team building and organization building. Once you can do your thing, once you can organize the administration of your thing, then building out a team and organization that is culturally aligned. Like everybody believes in the same purpose, everybody believes in the same vision, and everybody knows how to do the same things in the same process so you can do it consistently. That's the third level of being able to take an organization of people, steer them in a direction, and help them achieve. So I think that those would be like the three layers of just like identifying the need, filling the need, then administrating an actual construct to create the business vehicle. And once you can do that, then building out the organized infrastructure to be able to like build a big company of people.
Mm-hmm. Well, man, I thank you so much because, the whole premise of Lanes of Mastery is to basically identify people who do things in such a way that it piques your curiosity to pick their brain, right? And say, how do you do that? How do you make that look so easy or make it look? I remember my mom she was on like this, what was that? What were those? Remember those weight loss shakes back in the day? I forgot what they were, but yeah, I'm sure you probably know what I'm talking about. But so I remember my mom used to have this chocolate powder, and she used to put it like in this little glass cup with a little handle. So she used to put the powder in and put some ice in it, and right. And so she used to sit on the couch and she used to make it look so good, right? So one day she left, and I was like, shit, I'm trying some of that. So I go in there and I put it in there, right? I mean, I do all the steps just like she did it too. Because I was determined to taste what she was tasting. Man, I took one bite of it and I said, why would you eat this? You know what I mean? Right? And so then I got to dump it out and wash the sink out and everything. But my point was that she made it look like something, and it piqued my curiosity. It made me want to know what that experience was like. And so I asked you that last question because there are so many, and I guess because I work with so many young people, whether it's teaching them, whether it's mentoring them, coaching them, training them, and so many of them now, because society is different, they have access to business opportunities much earlier than what we did.
Yeah.
Back in our day, you had to wait your turn, right? It was like go to school, then go to college, then go to internship, then, right, work at the bottom, and you'd be 40 by the time you did anything, right? So, but I realized for myself looking back now, and for them, what I'm looking at now is that the word business or entrepreneur to them means something completely different than it does to you and I. Yeah. Like they don't have any idea. So they probably are all stuck at the second level at best. Like they don't even understand that there's levels and which order they're in. So the premise of this whole podcast is for people like that, young people, or people who are, because I think in the pandemic, what it's done is it's opened up people to be able to provide their services more independently than ever before. Right. So if you're a math teacher in high school and everybody was at home and they can't go to school to get tutoring, you can now go online, right? Offer yourself as a math tutor in ways that you would have never done before because now you're already at home. So you clicked off, done your grades, and you have 2 free hours because you don't have to go in traffic, right? And stuff like that. So I'm saying all that to say that the whole premise of this is to be able to find, whomever is listening to this, is to find themselves in the information you're providing. It's like, oh, that's what an entrepreneur is, or that's what a venture capitalist is, or oh, that's what I'm missing in my candy business in junior high. That's what I'm missing. Oh, I'm not organized. I'm just whatever. And so I really appreciate all of your information. I could keep you on here for hours. Then your family and your son will be mad at me. So I don't want that. We're trying to avoid that, right? But I really appreciate it, man, because just even for me, this was, sometimes you don't know, and then sometimes you forgot, and you forget. And you're like, oh, that's what I was missing. Now I know why I was frustrated at this or that, or I'm trying to be that guy with all the answers or whatever else, because I found myself to be that, in that scenario too many times. And I was determined to get out of that, and I have, but there's still other areas I have to work on. So I appreciate your wisdom, your experience, and being able to relate to that. So Thank you so much for all of your information. Before I let you go, tell people how to reach out to you for whatever it is that you offer, and and everything like that.
Yeah. I'm big on LinkedIn. Just Mickey Black on LinkedIn. You can find me there. And then The Republic. So it's The Republic with a K, TheRepublik.org is the site. So you can reach out there. My email, Mickey@therepublic.org. So you can reach me there. But yeah, any of the main platforms on social, you can find me. But LinkedIn is usually my favorite, where you will find me most.
Yes. Well, thank you, my good man. I appreciate all the information, all the wisdom, all the laughs. The magazine one is still the best one, man. Well, what are you saying? Oh, man, that was awesome.
Awesome.
Man, that's a lesson learned, though. I even took that when I was like, wait a minute. What are people really asking me for that I'm just like, yeah, I hear you. But what about this I'm trying to give you? Right? Yes, sir.
Sometimes you got to listen to the universe.
Yes. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend.